Good morning. It's Wednesday. I'm Wayne. Welcome to Wednesdays with Wayne. Brought to you by Facebook. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg, for making this available free. Great price point. So thank you for doing that. It's a great world I think we live in. When Bucky used to say to me, one of my mentors, Bucky Fuller, would say information is to be shared, not hoarded. So by virtue of the fact we can share information across the globe now with such a minimal cost, in this case, free. It's incredible the world that we're living in. So I want to thank Facebook and the people that edit and process and approve these videos. Thank you for doing that. They'll also want to thank our sponsor, the Real Estate Business School, where you get your license and learn to use it. This is a learn to use it part. So before I get into this morning again, as always, I want to thank you for your time. The most valuable thing anyone can give you is their time. So thank you for your time. I'm going to do my best, as always, to make sure your time is well spent. So I really appreciate you being here. What we're studying is cosmography by Buckminster Fuller. Bucky, as he was called, has more accolades after his name than any American in history, but amazingly few people have ever heard of him. And so I picked this book because it seems so timely. And one of the reasons why is because the first sentence says, the dark ages still reign over all humanity, and the depth and persistence of this domination are only now becoming clear. So that struck me. The last sentence, he says, in the back of the book also got me. He says, dear reader, traditional human power structures and their reign of darkness are about to be rendered obsolete. I don't know who he's referring to when he says traditional human power structures, but this is what he wrote. Traditional human power structures and their reign of darkness are about to be rendered obsolete. So have you ever wondered why you were put on planet Earth and what role, if any, you may have? I mean, why are humans here? And so Bucky set out to discover this. As I've said before, just to recap, some of the material we've covered before I go into material today, I learned long ago that one thing that stops people from learning is confusion. So you never want to go past a word you don't understand. If you're reading and you get sleepy or get confused, it's usually it's because you passed a word or a phrase or a concept you don't understand. So it's best to go back and review, because review adds approximately 70% to retention. So I've heard from educators I've studied. And if you go past the word you don't understand, it keeps you from learning further. So stop, go look up the word. If you don't understand it, define it, use it in a sentence over and over, get clear on it. If you really want to know if you understand something, explain it to someone else. If you can explain to someone else to the level where they get clear, then you know that you're clear. And that's the one reason I loved about teaching, is because I get clearer and clearer on the subject the more I teach it. So I want to recap who Bucky is, what he was doing, and how we got where we are today. So what happened was he broke a promise to his daughter, and she died in his arms. And he was about to commit suicide by drowning himself in Lake Michigan. He lived on the shores of Chicago, on the shores of Lake Michigan, in the city of Chicago. And as he was about to commit suicide, he heard a clap of thunder. He writes later, and this voice from the heavens says, you do not belong to you. You belong to the universe, and you may assume you are fulfilling your role if you convert your experiences to the highest advantage of others. And he had this thought that he never had an original thought. And then he thought about committing suicide, and he thought, I better think about that thought, because that's the last thought I'm going to have. And so as he was standing there thinking about this decision he was about to make, it occurred to him that there might be a purpose to his life. That there might be something more valuable to him being on planet Earth than earning a living. As he was told, you must earn a living. And what he said is, you don't have to earn the right to be here. You don't have to earn a living. Every one of us arrived here with a gift. something valuable to offer our fellow human beings. But we're taught to sell our body, mind, and spirit for a paycheck. We have to go earn a living and get a job and be good and do as you're told and don't make mistakes and all this other stuff. And so what he decided was he was going to commit his life to the fellow generations coming up behind his daughter Alexandra, who died in his arms. And what he posited is that if I'm going to commit myself to discovering the principles governing the universe, because the universe is totally regenerative. It regenerates all the time. There's no beginning, there's no end. It doesn't start, it doesn't stop. It's this cosmic array of energy that's ongoing. It'll go on forever. It's been going on forever. And most of what we know, what we've been taught, isn't true. So we set out to discover the generalized principles. And what the definition of a scientific generalized principle is something that's true in all cases, no exceptions. So if you can find an exception to the rule, it's not a generalized principle. For example, gravity. Gravity is a generalized principle. It's a relationship between two objects. If you don't understand gravity, step off the roof. You'll discover gravity. Oh my goodness. Yes, it exists. Somebody help me. There are other generalized principles he discovered. I'm going to go into another one today. And so his whacked out weirdo thought, I think it's weird because it's not what I've been taught. It's not what I've been told. It's not how things should be. And so I don't know what your reaction is when you hear somebody saying something that collides with your existing pocket of information, but there's a tendency to sometimes to write people off or call them crazy. And what I've realized over the years, that people who have come into my life out of nowhere and said something crazy to me, it turned out they were sent there for a reason. So my saying now is, when someone says something crazy, instead of just writing them off or discounting them or judging them or calling them crazy, what I say to myself is, that's an interesting point of view. And the reason why I say that is because you never know who's going to be bringing you your future. And there have been 5 times in my life when someone came to me, walked in front of me out of nowhere and brought me my future. So what I've learned is, rather than be right and memorizing right answers and all this, it's better for me to be flexible and to adapt, because the world is designed to change. It's not a static universe we live in. It's dynamic, and it's changing all that. It's chaotic, it's disruptive, it's changing. So the world is designed to change, and humans are designed to change. And what do humans resist the most? Right. So all I'm saying is, for me personally, when I study this material, I do my best to keep my eyes open and my ears open and mainly my mind open, so that I can see the changes coming as they occur. And they were coming to me in the early 80s, and I didn't see them. I was totally unconscious, totally oblivious. And I got hammered because I didn't see the changes. I lost everything. And so I came to Austin to start my life over. Fortunately, seemingly accidentally, but realistically, processionally, seemingly accidentally, but realistically via design, I met the people I was supposed to meet. I went to places I was supposed to go and learned the things I was supposed to learn. And some people say, well, that was a very coincidental life you've led. And I go, yes, that's an interesting point of view. So I want to recap this piece we covered last week. And I'm going to read to you again. I hope this isn't boring. But I want to read to you from Cosmography. I'm back on page 27. So I want to go through this again because I made a few distinctions on it. Doing the right things for the wrong reasons is typical of humanity. Precession, not conscious planning, provides a productive outcome for misguided political and military campaigns. I'm going to read that again. Precession, not conscious planning. So what is precession? Precession is the effect of bodies in motion on other bodies in motion. So if you're in motion, there's a precessional right-angled side effect. If you're headed east, then to your right is north. At a right angle, something is happening over here. So people say, I want to go find my true purpose. Your true purpose may remain forever obscure to you. But this is what Bucky heard. You may assume you're fulfilling your role. Your true purpose will forever remain obscure. But you may assume you're fulfilling your role if you convert your experiences to the highest advantage of others. So he quit working for a living. He started designing artifacts. He discovered the generalized principles governing the universe. And from those, he built artifacts that would raise the standard of living for all human beings on the planet, not just to make himself or a few corporations rich. And one of the generalized principles he discovered was precession. We went over this a little bit last week. So the earth and the sun are both in motion, and what's pulling them together is this generalized principle, this force called gravity. If gravity were the only force in effect, what would happen? They collide. Right? Right. But we don't collide with the sun or any other planets that are all out there orbiting each other. Instead, precession forces Earth to orbit the sun in a 90-degree angle to the direction of the gravitational pull. So gravity pulls in this way, precession forces the orbit. That's what happens. And then he says, the honeybees, art was one of the many courses that I failed, so I can hear you laughing out there. What he said is, the honeybee enters the flower blossoms in search of nectar to make honey. And what happens is the pollen gets on the honeybee's legs. At what angle? It's at 90 degrees. It's right here. And so as the bee goes into other flowers, it dusts off. See, the flower are connected to the ground by roots. They're immovable. How are they going to pollinate? How are they going to reproduce? The bee causes the flower. They cross-pollinate. So down here at 90 degrees, unbeknownst to the bee, it's its true purpose. So the bee doesn't know it's supposed to be it's supposed to be pollinating and cross-pollinating all the different rooted botanicals in one another right-angle precessional way. It just does what it's supposed to be doing. And it goes on to say, Bucky goes on to say, humans don't do what they're supposed to be doing. They sold their body, mind, and spirit for a paycheck. They're told to earn a living. Make good grades, get a good job, work hard, don't make mistakes. Do as you're told. So it says most people believe there's a God or a great spirit or greater intellect governing the universe, but they don't trust, so they go get a job. And what he said is, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, the universe will take care of me. And he did what he was supposed to be doing. The universe did support him, and he lived like that for over 50 years. No visible means of support, purely trust in universe. And he created more artifacts, more inventions that did raise the standard of living. So, the question is, if the bee might have a true purpose, who else might have a true purpose? Us. Right? Right. Will you ever know what it is? No. But again, you may assume that you're fulfilling your role if you convert your experiences to the highest advantage of others. So I want to recap this piece on precession. Fundamentally, he says, nature's long-term design intervenes to circumvent the short-sightedness of human individuals, corporations, and nations competing for a share of the economic pie. Nature's long-term design intervenes to circumvent the short-sightedness of individuals, corporations, and nations competing for a share of the economic pie. Fundamentally, political economists misassume an inadequacy of life support to exist on our planet. It's built into the system. scarcity. And all become with Malthusian economics. Thomas Malthus is when it was early in 1500s when the British knew that whoever controlled the shipping lanes would control the earth. They thought the earth was flat at one time, as we all know. And then someone sailed across the edge. All it was is out of sight. I think it's 24 or 25, 7 something miles. That the earth bends, obviously, because it's around, and we just lose sight. So it looks, we're so small compared to the earth, it looks flat. And obviously it's not. So someone sails over the edge of the, off the cliff. But they didn't fall off the cliff, they came back. And so the British knew whoever controlled those shipping lanes, and they discovered this around the world traveling. Whoever controlled the shipping lanes would control the world, and they did that for 400 years. Because of the around the world travelings, we were finally able for the first time in history to take an inventory, an approximate inventory of all the world's resources. When Malthus looked at his inventory of resources, he says, holy mackerel, the world's resources are growing geometrically, arithmetically, but the population is growing exponentially. So we'll have more people than we have resources before. So pray all you want. There's not enough to support everybody. And that's what Malthusian economics is built on. Scarcity, allocation of scarce resources. The problem is there's no such thing as scarcity. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Fundamentally, political economists misassume an inadequacy of life support on our planet Earth. Look, I'll just track the trends of an industry that's gone down. In 1800, what percentage of our population was in agriculture? 98%, right? And then by 1900, we were starting to transition. So we were coming off the agrarian age, we're transitioning into the industrial age. And people were leaving the farms because there was machinery developed that would allow people to run machines, and machines did the work. And so then the industrialists came on the scene. This whole new era that started about 1880s that went through in 1900. We went into the 20th century, and people were leaving the farms and migrating into the cities to run the industrial machinery, to run the manufacturing plants, to run the assembly lines. And we started to transition, so it started dropping. And approximately 85% of people were in agriculture. Then by 1950, it dropped to about 23%. And then by the year 2000 to today, 2020, there's actually less than 2% of the population is in agriculture. So if you're raising your kids to be a farmer, you may not want to do that because we don't need, but the farming, production of food has been handled. So this is just the one industry that's gone down. We're finding that there are several more going down right now because the world is designed to change. And because the world's designed to change, and everything is changing, because nothing is static. So, what he's saying here, humanity therefore competes military to see which political system, socialism or capitalism, is fittest to survive. So that's when Darwin pops up. And Darwin says, only the fittest survive. And then Karl Marx pops up and he says, without the workers, the elite would have nothing. The world revolves around the working class. So we need to take care of the working class. They're the fittest to survive. And Darwin says the fittest to survive had this theory that we are, as nature, as animals and humans reproduce, the weakest strains are weeded out and made obsolete. He says specialization leads to extinction. It's best to become a comprehensive generalist. So Karl Marx says, since the workers are the ones in charge of everything and really run everything, we think it should be from those who have to those who need, and socialism became born. That's where it comes from. From those according to their means, to those according to their needs. Which is great in theory. And then somebody else pops up and says, wait a minute, we're the ones that take the risk. The capitalists take the risk. And the capitalists deploy capital. And they provide the jobs and the opportunities and create the inventions. So these two entities, these two belief systems, not entities, belief systems, capitalism and socialism were born. But they're both based on the fundamental thought that there's not enough to go around. In slavish observance of this misassumption, humans devote their most costly efforts and resources to killingry, a vast arsenal of weapons, skillfully designed to kill ever more people at ever greater distances and ever shorter periods of time, while employing fewer pounds of material, less urge of energy, and fewer seconds of time per killing. And so if you look at the American Industrial War Complex, we have done a great job of applying this thing of doing more with less to weaponry. And so Bucky goes on to say, it's all processional. And so if you understand this, that bees inadvertently make honey. Bees don't set out to pollinate. They inadvertently pollinate. The true purpose is to make honey. That's why they're called honeybees. So he said, humans, because we think there's not enough to go around, we fight, we create devices that kill people. More people at greater distance in less time than ever before. So we have this war, and what we need to fight the war is weapons. So the right angle processional side effect of having wars is we create these weapons. And the weapons get better and better and better and better and better at killing people. Again, more people, less time, greater distances. We've now got drones. The drones that fly across Afghanistan are flown out of, it's in an office in California. They go into the office and they get, my shift, okay, good, have a good day, controls. We're flying drones around the world. It's incredible. So out of that, the right angle side effect of weapons is a processional side effect is we have better and better technology. This is where GPS comes from. Do you have a smartphone? You got GPS? What do you pay for it? So what happens is we get better and better technology. If you understand this, if you understand technology, you understand there's no such thing as scarcity. We live in a world of abundance. So why isn't there enough food? Well, we pay our farmers not to grow it to prop up the price. Everybody knows that. So we've got, 10,000, 15,000 people around the world every day that die of starvation, and we pay our farmers not to grow. It creates this false sense of scarcity when what we actually live in a world of abundance. There is more than enough. So it comes to this next principle that Bucky discovered. Technology allows us to do so much more with so much less. So in the basic primitive style of technology, of leverage, then you'd have this caveman trying to move this boulder out of the way. He couldn't figure, it was too heavy for him. This weighs 500 pounds, he weighs 200 pounds. He can't move the boulder. So what does he do? He gets a fulcrum, he puts a pole over it, and he applies a little bit of energy to it, and he moves the boulder. So leverage is discovered. And humans have unconsciously, subconsciously been using this principle of leverage for thousands of years, doing more with less and more with less and more with less and more, to the point where we do almost everything with nothing. As I mentioned last week, Moore's Law is a classic example of leverage. He said every year the size of the computer chip gets smaller and the capacity gets bigger and prices keep coming down in relation to cost. So look at all the technology that we have. So this is what he's talking about. Humans. Initially unforeseen, the mass production technology acquired supposedly only for weapons has been converted after each war to powerful and practical use. I'm going to read that again. Initially unforeseen, the mass production technologies supposedly only for weapons has been converted after each war to powerful and practical use. Cosmic evolution has put humans to work, developing unconsciously the technology to produce ever more effective results in ever quicker ways at ever greater ranges of effectiveness, with ever fewer pounds of material, ergs of energy, and seconds of time per accomplished function. Thus, so it means less energy, shorter time, less material, thus acquiring the technology capability to do what politics could never do. That is, to produce so much high standard life support with so little material and energy investment as now, for the first time in history, to be able to sustain all humanity at ever higher standards of living than have ever before experienced or dreamed of. Wow. But he goes on, and he says, because of, as with all children, I have been born a deliberate comprehensiveness, and because I had that innate interest, because I had not had that innate interest stifled, and had grown to be deliberately self-cultivated comprehender of invisible as well as visible reality in an age of specialization, I clearly saw and broadly announced that all of the foregoing was true and feasible. I also realized that our newly achieved evolutionary stage of technical ability to sustainingly support all humanity at an unprecedentedly higher standard of living was or is only to be accomplished by objectively and synergetically integrating the vast ranges of invisible realities, electrochemical and electromagnetic spectra. How does he get this? The realization demonstrated to me the exclusively mind over technology functioning of humans in universe. It became clear that only by good fortune did I happen to first stumble upon this emerging potential when I did. In 1927, I was a complete failure by society's standards of economic success. I was about to commit suicide on the shore of Lake Michigan when it dawned on me that potential success, not just for the individual, but for all of humanity, was implied in doing more with less than visible reality technology. 1927, he figures this out. I was convinced that humanity was graduating into a new era of consciously direct rather than inadvertent. So what he's saying here is, rather than inadvertently, so the bee is inadvertently pollinating. It's not consciously pollinating, right? It's making honey. Inadvertently, it pollinates. But what he's saying here is, I was convinced that humanity was graduating into a new era of consciously direct rather than inadvertent evolution, marked by the realization of its cosmic, intellect-conceived, design science functioning advantage. In other words, we woke up and became conscious as a race and said, as a human race, and said, let's choose our procession. Instead of doing things inadvertently, instead of designing all these weapons to kill all these people and using it for killing, why don't we use it for living? And maybe we could advance the standard of living for everybody, because this applies, technology applies. Obviously, we proved it works. And henceforth and swiftly, we must progress to the stage of doing all the right things for all the right reasons, instead of doing all the right things for all the wrong reasons. A byproduct of processional phenomena. So again, it's saying this is Go byproduct. He said, just focus, go straight to it. You save a lot of time. Einstein proclaimed there are only two prime motivations for all humanities. Einstein, fear and longing. Acquiring the costly technology for producing national defense armaments alone is the politically assumed number one mandate. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. We do have enemies. A mandate based on national fear. Well, yeah. And fact. The fact is, this isn't puppy dogs and rainbows world. You can't sit around sing kumbaya and hope nobody comes over the hill to kill you. So how do you play win-win in a win-lose world? Such a survivalist mentality inadvertently also produces life-supporting technology. But it takes a quarter of a century longer than it would if humanity first recognized the public longing to attain sustainable peace for all humanity and directly used that same high technology production for livingry rather than for armaments. I'm convinced that nature uses different gestation rates for both biological and technological phenomena. I'm also convinced of the infallibility of nature's revolutionary intertiming design of these different gestation rates. So it goes on to say, my personal strategy, excuse me just a second. Excuse me. Thank you. He says, I have no desire to develop the premature babies of industrial technology. As a consequence, I have no literary agents, no lecture bureaus, no advertising, no PR people, no sales agents. Neither myself nor anyone on my staff is allowed to solicit supporting grants. I have no salespeople to go out and sell me nor to fund an operating budget. I ask no one to listen to me or to look at what I produce. I speak only to people when they ask me to do so. When, however, people ask me and what it is they see I produce, I give them my very best explanations. These personal operating principles are based on a kind of self-sufficient mechanism that I've always appreciated in nature's design, and some supply-side economists have administered in human institutions. These rules of thumb have carried me through many crises during the past 55 years. My economic survival pattern was based on my fortunate assumption that nature would support me in my work, but only if I eschewed all politics and worked entirely in artifact invention and development and only on behalf of all humanity. What a stud. Phew. In view of all the foregoing, I saw the work of Albert Einstein as an individual who had been uniquely inspired by a clear vision of nature's generalized principles. I found myself to be inspired as well by an awareness of the evolutionary significance of the human mind's winnowing out of all those generalized principles and synergetic consequence of the objective regeneration of universe of principles into a myriad of local in-universe special case evolution through problem-solving technology. So it says humans are designed to be information gatherers and problem solvers, that we're put here to solve problems. That's why we have minds and brains. Brains gather information and store it. The mind sees the interrelationships, the invisible relationships between events. So he says the era, that's why animals have brains, but they don't have minds. Humans have minds for a special reason. He says the era of exploration and operation into the 99.99% of reality, non-directly contactable by the human senses, is coincident with Einstein's realization that evolutionary change is normal and that the normal speed of all electromagnetic radiation is 186,000 miles per second. So what he's saying here is 99.9% of the reality, non-directly contactable by the human senses. Non-directly contactable by, what he's saying is 99.99% of the universe is invisible. So us as humans, we're sensorial creatures, right? We would take on information through our senses. So what are the five senses? We have sight. So if we see it, it's real. You people say this, right? I'll believe it when I see it. No, you'll see it when you believe it, because you can't see. We don't see anything. All we see is reflections. Ice pick up light, reflect. We don't see anything out there. All we see out there is what's in here. We've never been out there. All we see is what's in the brain. We see it, and then we match it up and we see it out there. If you didn't see it in here, you couldn't see it out there. So we see, we have eyes. So we take on information through our eyes. Visual. We take on information through our ears. Auditory. How do we teach children? How do we teach? Talk to people. Talking isn't teaching. Listening isn't learning. And memorization of the right answers is no indication of a person's intelligence or ability. This is why I struggled in school. They talk to me all day long for hours on end. I'm like, holy mackerel, please stop, shut up. Talk. I might as well not have these on my head. They're only there to make me look like you. How come that guy doesn't have ears, Mommy? Shh. He's a visual learner. But I can look at a page, scan it, and I can ace a test. You start talking to me, I'm telling you. Ask anybody who knows me. It doesn't take long. My mind drifts. I just don't take in information through my ears. And then we have touch or feel, which is kinesthetic. So we have visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Then we have taste, which is gustatory, and smell, which is olfactory. So these are our five senses. We can smell it, it's real. If we taste it, it's real. We hear it, it's real. We see it, it's real. If we can touch it, it's real. If we can't do any of those, mentally, it doesn't exist. And what Bucky's saying is 99.9% of the universe is invisible. So what we see is 1/10 of 1%. So if you can get your mind around this one, think of this. Everything we can see, touch, and feel represents 1/10 of 1% of everything that's out there. I'm not saying, just reading the book. But it does change my perspective. So now I go out, I go, okay, when I look, what do I see? When I listen, what do I hear? What's out there? What's out there right now that I can't see? So we're transitioning, and this is what I think is what's wiping out the middle class. It's because we're transitioning from the physical to the metaphysical, from the visible to the invisible, from manufacturing to thinking, from brawn to brain. And we're doing so much less with so much more with so much less, and everything with nothing. We don't need people working anymore. This pandemic is going to change our world forever. This rubber band, I don't think, is going to snap back to its original shape. The future is not an extension of the present. It's a paradigm shift on a global scale. So he goes on to say, this view completely altered for humanity the concept established by Isaac Newton that the physical norm is a state of rest. Object at rest tend to stay at rest. The problem is there's no such thing as rest. Newtonian physics is obsolete. It's incorrect. Sorry. Actually, I'm not. In this view, the physical norm is changeless, and thus change is to be avoided. When Einstein's concepts were first introduced, Professor Percy Williams Bridgman of Harvard a pioneer in cryogenics, sought to understand why Einstein had got the whole world of science so far off physically comprehensible balance. Bridgman concluded that the difference between the viewpoints of conventional science and Einstein was that, in contrast to science's attempt to isolate experiments with controlled conditions, Einstein was always comprehensively considerate of all the environmental conditions and events intended upon the experiment. So these controlled conditions experiments produced a bad result because they were controlled conditions. You can't control the conditions because the world is changing all the time. It's in a state of flux and disruption and chaos. And when you go into a lab and do a controlled experiment, you get a false positive. You get a false result. That's what he's saying. Bridgman called Einstein's methodological concern with both comprehensive and incisively focused upon information operational procedures. Operational procedures eliminate all recourse to axioms, the "it has always been" or "it is assumed to be" truisms commonly employed by much of our educational system. It's always been that way. We've always done it like that. That's the way it is. Particularly in those areas of education that most people would think of as having long ago been infallibly explained by mathematics, physics, engineering, semantics, geography, meteorology, and cosmology. And he goes on to say, this is Bucky writing again, "I'm convinced that academic science's comprehensive three-dimensional perpendicular three-dimensional, so we don't live in a three-dimensional universe, we live in a four-dimensional. So if you look at Euclidean geometry, it goes out the window too. So plane geometry is two-dimensional, Euclidean is three-dimensional, but we live in a four-dimensional world, and I'll show you in a minute. Four-dimensional, convergent, divergent, directly tunable, coordinatedly constant system as to render present-day academic sciences mathematics unnecessarily complex and understandably incomprehensible to the majority of clear-thinking youth. As such, present-day science's inscrutability prevents us, who are laboring under the political religious axiom that a fundamental adequacy of life support exists on planet Earth, it prevents us from spontaneously apprehending what has transpired in the invisible reality, and thereby comprehending why and how it is now technically feasible to take care of all humanity at a sustainable higher standard of living than any humans have ever experienced before. On the other hand, I am confident that I've discovered nature's own coordinate system, the most economical and popular comprehensible, mathematical, intercoordinate, formative, energy matter transformative, and deformative system is definitely presented in the approximately 1,300 pages of Synergetics and Synergetics 2. These volumes enable an individual to comprehend design science effectively and adequately. So here's what I think he's saying. There's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as scarcity. There's no such thing as a straight line. There's no such thing as a solid. And we don't live in three dimensions, we live in four. And 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 3. 1 + 1 + 1 can equal 4. So this is what he set out to discover. And he discovered and mathematically proved his discoveries. So one of the things he discovered was looking at what is he said, I take a universal global view. And rather than go micro, we'll go macro. I look at universe and then drill down, he didn't use those words, but he looks at the smaller, breaks into smaller pieces. And then he goes in, he doesn't start with the pieces. He doesn't go look at a carburetor and go, okay, carburetor does this, carburetor mixes oxygen and fuel, and then gets to the car. He starts with the car and then works down, ultimately ends up at the carburetor. He did the same thing with universe. So he started with universe. He studied Kepler, Newton, Galileo, all the astronomers, and they figure out the mathematical coordinates governing the universe. And they could tell that the distance between the planets is the same. The distance between the sun and the moon is the same proportion between an electron and the nucleus of an atom. They're the same distance apart. And he goes, "You're going to tell me that's via design? That's consequential? That's an accident?" He said, "All via design." So why are humans on Earth? He says, "We're in the final examination. Are we going to kill each other because we think there's not enough? Because we think there's scarcity? We're going to kill each other in the name of God? Are we going to kill each other in the name of religion? Or is it going to be utopia or oblivion?" This is what he started studying. He says the problem with this is teacher puts a square on the board. The only thing that holds the square up is the board. Square won't hold the shape. This isn't universe. You'll find this in nature. This is something man-made. You won't find this in nature. It won't hold its shape. So what's the minimum system that holds its shape? Well, the minimum structure is triangle. Holds its shape. No matter what you do with the triangle, it holds its shape. You don't have to hold it up. It's there. It exists. And what we're taught to focus is on the triangle. So when you draw a triangle on the ground, you're actually drawing two, inside and outside. So the inside triangle is here, which is another triangle here. So here's a triangle, and here's a triangle. So now we have three triangles. Minimum structure in universe. Holds its shape. Not this. Triangle. Building block. The building block of the universe. This is where the Buckminster Fullerenes come from. This is where the geodesic dome comes from. This is where all the structures. You see those trusses that go through the buildings? Those octet truss that holds them up? You take a geodesic dome, you build it with these. You can get the greatest amount of volume with the least amount of material or landmass with no supports inside. Because this is what the universe uses, triangles. So here I have, so what I'm going to do is demonstrate as best I can two different generalized principles that are operating simultaneously. And they operate simultaneously all the time. They're all around us. Well, one is this one. And this, as we discussed, ladies and gentlemen, is simply doing more with less, to the point you do everything with nothing. And the other one is synergy. So in school, that's what we're taught. 1 plus 1 plus 1. We're told it equals 3. If you answer anything else, what do they call you? Excuse me. If the teacher says, "What's 1 plus 1 plus 1?" and you answer anything besides 3, what do they call you? Well, in Texas, they call you spatial. You have special ed. You get to go to special ed. And the teachers used to call my mother all the time, and they go, "Miss Morgan, yes, this Wayne, he's such a special boy." He's so special. Of course, in Texas, we call it spatial. He's spatial. Really? Tell me more. So I'm going to demonstrate two of these principles that are operating out there. I'm going to demonstrate leverage and synergy. That you actually can do more with less, and you are every day, either consciously or subconsciously. But you're using this principle every day. And this exists too. This is the sum is greater than the whole. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts considered individually. So can 1 plus 1 plus 1 equal 4? Yeah. Can it equal 5? Yes. Can it equal 10? Yes. It's invisible. It's an energy that doesn't make any sense. So if you take some of these corporations or some of these sports teams, excuse me, and you look at the players, let's take a sports team, for example. You look at the players and you line them up and you put all the stats up, you look at them statistically on paper. There's no way this team can beat that team. But they do. Because some teams are synergy. Some players on the team are the kiss of death because they have no synergy. Me. That kiss of, they can't wait to get rid of. Highly talented, incredible athletes. Those teams can't wait to get rid of them because they are the kiss of death because they don't understand synergy. So it's the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of the parts. So these are the two definitions of synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts considered individually. It's one definition. The other one is it's a behavior of whole systems unpredictable by the behavior of the parts. It's the behavior of the result of whole teams unpredicted by the behavior of the players. There's no way you can predict the Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl. By the way, did you hear Mahomes got a $400 million contract? $400 million for throwing a bag of air. Excuse me. Sorry. So this is it. More with less and synergy. 1 plus 1 plus 1. 3 triangles. So I'm going to build this. This is what Bucky called the tetrahedron, the minimum system in universe. So I'm going to take this minimum structure. Hopefully you can see this. Lynn, can you get over here and help me for a second? Just want to make sure they can see this. So I'm taking these 3 triangles apart and I'm reorganizing them.
There we go. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone. I apologize. So now I've taken these 3 triangles, and now I have a tetrahedron. So I have this left over, plus these 2 pieces. So this is an example of leverage. I'm doing more with less. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles. So this is tetrahedron. This is minimum structure. So this is triangle, minimum structure in universe. This is tetrahedron, minimum system in universe. Insideness, outsideness. Minimum system. 4. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. Holds its shape. Tetrahedron. So what do we now know? That 1 plus 1 plus 1 can equal 4. There's the model. And this is what Bucky was saying to people. This is rather simplistic, but multiply this. So this is where he got the car from. You get the 3-wheel car. He designed his inventions after nature. It looked like a fish. You know how hard it is to parallel park? It's so hard to parallel park, design cars or do it for. It's so hard to parallel park, they're designing cars, the manufacturers are designing cars now to parallel park for us. So you have to pass the car you want to park behind, then you have to back in. This car you built had 2 wheels on the front and 1 in the back, because you only need 3, you don't need 4. Then you drive straight into the car you want to park behind, drive straight into it, spin the rear wheel right to the curb. I forget the stats, but I think, and don't quote me because I'm not 100% accurate on this. I think it would seat 13 to 15 people, got 130 to 140 miles per gallon, and it was just an incredible piece of machinery. But a couple accidents, and later, and of course the big 3 automakers got rid of it because it was built too cheap, it didn't burn enough fuel, and it lasted too long. So, these are the generalized principles. Precession and leverage. Always only coexisting. We'll go into it more next week. The question is, what has this got to do with us, and what's it got to do with our lives? So how do we use the generalized principles? And what Bucky was saying, I'm not concerned with man's laws. I'm more concerned with nature's laws, excuse me, and how to apply them. And this is what he did. And I met his daughter Alexandra in 1995 at a convention in San Diego where they were celebrating Bucky 100th year of Bucky's birthday. He was born in 1895. In 1995 was the celebration. And I met her and I said, what was it like living with him? She said, you wouldn't believe it. He would sit there at the kitchen table and design toothpicks and dried peas and design things like this day after day after day after day after day. And the amount of money we needed when we needed it, shove it up. That's all he did. He committed his whole life to humanity, to raising the standard of living for all human beings on earth, not just to make himself rich. So as I said before, most people believe there's a God or a great spirit or a greater intellect governing the universe, but not many people trust. So my question to you is, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, or have you sold your body, mind, and spirit for a paycheck? Do you believe, or do you trust? That's it for today. This has been Wednesdays with Wayne. Well, life will never be the same. So I'll see you next week. Thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up. Please tell your friends to come and watch some of this stuff. I really appreciate you being here today. I hope this is making sense. You find a way to use it in your life. I have. And I'll explain more as we go through it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'll see you next week. Between now and then, do what you're supposed to be doing. The universe will take care of you. Let's go out and make it a better world. Thank you very much.